Understanding the relationship between gameplay and narrative can help us reach a deeper understanding of play, games, and the power of player immersion in the context of a digital space. Play is a concept that has been examined by many philosophers. Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, wrote that the true man wants both danger and diversion. According to French philosopher Roger Caillois, play is freely participated in, separate from normal reality, uncertain of outcome, not engaged in for gain, governed by rules, and contains elements of make-believe. Huizinga's concept of the magic circle traces the psychological, temporal, and spatial boundaries between the so-called real world and games. This has been retroactively applied to include video games. Games engage us. They present us with fine motor and mental challenges, creating rewarding cognitive, emotional, and kinesthetic feedback loops. Video games have two layers, the abstract and the narrative, which are linked by rules. Great games devoid of narrative do exist. Tetris is a good example. However, over time, narrative has become more important to video games. Rather than telling stories in the traditional sense of storytelling, game developers design spaces shaped by rules. Rather than being the storytellers narratologists might assume them to be, or the experience designers perceived by ludologists, game developers could instead be categorized as being narrative architects. The adventure game genre provides an excellent example of the abstract-narrative fusion. In adventure games, the player becomes the protagonist in an interactive narrative. Gameplay is driven by exploration, puzzle-solving, and storytelling. Myst and Riven, the sequel to Myst, changed the landscape of video game history. The main goals of Myst were exploring the expansive world and revealing its embedded narrative. In addition to the unhurried pace and inability to die in-game, the emphasis on puzzle solving set Myst and Riven apart from the shooting, racing, and fighting games popular at the time. Adventure games like Myst exemplify aspects of embedded narrative. The player must navigate their way through the game world, beat antagonists, and solve puzzles to progress through the game. The virtual spaces contained within embedded narratives are memory palaces built from clues which the player must solve in order to reconstruct the plot of the game. Enacted narratives might include story elements built around the character's exploration of virtual spaces, with aspects of the environment hindering or helping their progress. Game spaces in emergent narratives enable players to construct stories. Interactivity and coherence are balanced by a combination of embedded and enacted narrative. Interactivity is the main difference between games and novels. Even relatively subpar storytelling can have a powerful impact on the player in an interactive narrative, as the player essentially becomes the co-creator of the game. This is especially the case for adventure games, in which the agency and embeddedness of the player can dramatically enhance overall engagement. 3 dimensions of immersion, sensory, challenge, and imaginative, overlap differently with different styles of gameplay. Thanks to the immersive experience Myst offered, the adventure game genre was permanently altered. In addition to the influx of adventure games following Myst, a new genre of Myst-style games, also known as Myst clones, emerged. These games shared features like environmentally focused graphics, puzzle integration, and simple stories that mostly functioned as framing devices for the player character's arrival. Cyan, the creators of Myst, launched their most recent adventure game, Firmament, 30 years after Myst was released. This demonstrates the continued growth of adventure games, whilst simultaneously reinforcing the culture of nostalgia at the heart of the genre. Point-and-click adventure games like Myst originally featured pre-rendered graphics, but gradually real-time games became quicker and cheaper to produce. Today, it is possible for game developers to create real-time point-and-click adventure games without compromising on visual quality. However, some game developers are dedicated to continuing the tradition of single-player slideshow format using pre-rendered graphics and full-motion video characters in place of animations. One such game developer is Aaron Guinair, whose upcoming release, Nier, is heavily inspired by Myst and its sequel, Riven. Nier, scheduled for release in 2024, combines familiar gameplay mechanics with a unique narrative, creating digital spaces that can evoke powerful feelings of nostalgia. It appeals to fans of retro point-and-click games whilst incorporating an array of contemporary design elements, all of which are heavily immersive, sensorially rich, cognitively challenging, and imaginatively satisfying. Nier promises to provide a nostalgic, narratively driven, and immersive gaming experience. Older adventure games like Myst and Riven, as well as newer adventure games like Firmament and Nier, can provide gamers with Nietzschean danger and diversion, whilst utilising Jungian creativity and exemplifying Caillois' essential qualities of play. Game developers are narrative architects of imaginary worlds that can catalyse strong reactions, including nostalgia, in players. Adventure games are played for the sheer enjoyment of doing so. It is likely that this will remain the case for as long as adventure games continue to exist.